Hello, I am Alyssa Whetstone, and we will be painting a few shelves of books today. I don't know why, but I've been on a book kick when it comes to making paintings after that initial stack of books tutorial. If you haven't tried my stack of books, I'll link that below. You should give that one a try as well. Super fun, a little bit more simple than this one. This one is going to consist of 3 shelves, so what I'm doing first is organizing those shelves using flat horizontal lines and a straight edge. So that makes sure that they're nice and neat. Most of my drawing today I will not actually draw ahead of time. I'll be doing straight in paint, but lining up these shelves makes sure that I know where the books are going to go and that it all looks neat. When I'm putting these shelves, I'm actually not putting them in the center. If you notice, the top shelf is a little bit further away from the top of the paper than the bottom shelf. That's because I'll be putting things on the shelves, which will then make the whole image more centered, knowing that the bottom shelf is truly the bottom, but the top shelf will have some things on it that will make it appear taller. Then I just made sure that they were all the same length by doing those vertical lines at the edges. One more detail I'm going to add before I get started painting is some supports for the shelves by just putting some little rectangles down underneath the shelves to make it look like they are actually supported and hanging on the wall. You could do any type of support, have fun with it, make a different shape, make it circular, make it actually like wrap around the shelf. That's totally up to you. Now let's paint some books. What you can't see me doing, unfortunately, because I took this video in vertical for the lovely Instagram, is I am mixing up some colors, but actually why I'm going back and forth so quickly is I'm just waking up my colors. I work with watercolor paint. I use tubes of paint, however, I squeeze out the tubes of paint and then let them dry. So by adding a little water, I am waking that paint back up, which then makes it, work, and I can bring it over to my paper. I'm going to be choosing a group of colors to use for my painting today. I'm going to be choosing mostly blues, maybe some greens, maybe purples, kind of thinking of cool colors. It helps make my painting feel more connected if I have the same group of colors. You can totally do whatever colors you want. You could do all the colors. You could pick just one color and make dark and light different values of that color. So here I'm using the same blue from my paint palette, but the first one you'll see was much lighter, and then I made one darker. When I'm choosing a few colors to work with, I like to pick one color and jump around and use it everywhere I want to before I switch to my second color. This is just more convenient and easier. And also with watercolor, you really want to, well, specifically when painting objects like this, you want to let each area dry before you paint next to it. Otherwise they mix because water flows into water. So knowing that I want my books to stay separate, I'm going to be painting them and then letting them dry before I paint the book right next to them. So by using the same color for a while, I am purposefully leaving gaps, knowing that I will fill other colors of books in between those books to make my shelf feel more full. And this way I don't have to stop painting and come back. I can just keep painting and making sure to leave those spaces, and then I can put more books in later. As I'm painting these books, some of the books I am leaving some white space. In watercolor paint, there isn't white paint unless you choose to use white gouache on top or a white pen, which you totally can do. However, if you want a big area of white, it is best to use the white of the paper. So you'll see some of the books I'm leaving an edge white or I'm leaving a big area white, and this creates more variety within the books on my picture, so it looks more interesting because there's a lot of different things happening. Now, as I mix up my next color, I'm going to be moving to some greens, but sometimes it can be helpful to mix a little blue with the green, or in this case, I think I'll jump to the bright green and then I'll go back and maybe add some turquoises to my books just to, again, make them feel all connected. So I'm going to continue to vary the size of the books on my shelf, the height, the width, if they are standing, if they're laying down. I'm also trying to plan where I'm going to have objects on my shelf and not just books. So maybe I'll have some bookends or some plants or some objects and things that are significant to me, or you could do something significant to you. So kind of plan where the books might end and where you could add other details or unique things to your bookshelf besides books. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through a bunch of this bookmaking since it is a lot of the same thing. My tips for you if you are painting along is just to keep a variety. Change up your color, change up the size, change up the designs, knowing that you can go back and add darker layers on top or use a pen to do more designs. I'll probably do that at the end. So you don't have to make every single book perfectly unique right now, but just give it places and spaces for those designs to be added down the road, if not right now. So let's fast forward and we'll chat again in a moment. All right, I have been finishing these wooden shelves and I wanted to tell you about a quick little trick. So first I paint them kind of a solid regular brown, but then what I do is I actually clean off my brush, dry it a tiny bit, and using a clean, mostly dry brush, I go back in while the paint is still wet and I kind of pull and drag some openings in the paint, just trying to create a little bit of texture of wood grain by going kind of back and forth. It's lifting some of that wet paint off of the paper and just creating some subtle variety in the tones. This is something you could also just go back and create lines with a pen afterwards, or when you're initially painting it, you could use a few different browns. But one technique is to use that clean, mostly dry brush to lift and pull some of the paint off in horizontal lines to create that wood grain. Now, you might have noticed that I made this random little blue blob on above this little plant pot. I did this on purpose because I wanted to show you a trick. Do you think you can erase watercolor? True or false? Well, it's true, but you can't use an eraser. We are using a magic eraser or a melamine sponge to erase that little dot of paint. I'm adding a little bit of water to it, squeezing out most of it so it's not super wet, and then I'm going to very gently rub the melamine sponge onto the watercolor paint spot that I want to get rid of. What this is doing is it's almost like a super fine sandpaper actually, so it's kind of scratching the paint off the surface. This can tear the paper a tiny bit, but if you're gentle enough and it's a small enough spot of paint, you can actually erase it. But then you want to make sure that area dries before you paint on it. There might be a few little pills of paper where it kind of scratched the surface, so you'll want to wipe those off, make sure it dries, and then it'll be good to paint on again. So something you don't want to have to do a lot of, especially not in the same spot. However, if that pesky little mistake happens, especially if that spot's going to stay white, it's a super easy trick to use. But I will be painting over that spot with my plant and it'll still work just fine. So I hope you enjoyed that fun trick. I'm going to fast forward again and we'll talk again soon. What I'm doing now is I'm going back with paint still to add different details to my bookshelves. So I'm using some darker colors of what I've already painted with to add designs or details, things that I won't do with my pen afterwards. So larger areas or things I really want in color, I'm going to add those with the paint first. I know I fast forwarded through quite a few details like the plants and the objects on the shelves, so if you want to try to look at those closer to follow along, you sure can. The biggest thing to remember when doing objects in watercolor is to start with a base value, usually a lighter value, and then going on top to add darker values like shadows. So on the plants, I did a lighter green to begin, and then once that was dry, I went back and added the medium and dark greens to make it look more realistic. Just like I'm doing with this little clock, I started with a light medium gray and now I'm adding some shadows with darker gray and details on top. I'll do the same with the glasses and the little trinket box, and then we won't want to forget to add shadows to the shelves as well. Even though this is kind of a flat illustration, it's fun to add those little hints towards a 3D-ness just to make it feel that much more realistic and that much more intriguing. So for the shelves, I'm just making a very thin line of a dark brown at the very base of the rectangle, not really worrying about a cast shadow on the wall, but just keeping it more illustrative and not necessarily like it's a photograph of a space in a room. So let's go back and add those shadows and designs if you are following along, just to add that extra dimension. Finally, I'm getting out my pen. I use a Micron felt tip pen. I'll link that below. And I'm using a 01, which is a fairly fine point. The smallest that I use is a 005, which is even smaller, but that would be kind of hard to see since some of my colors are kind of dark. I do want this line to be a little bit bold so that you can see where I put it. I'm deciding to trace some of my books to give them a hard edge, to add some more designs on top. I could do it to everything. I could do it to just a few important things. I think I'm going to find kind of a middle ground where I trace about half, maybe a little more than half of the things on my shelves to really give them definition and just the style that I enjoy, which is a more illustrative and outlined style with those harsh edges and fun little fine details. So you can do this or you could not do this and you could just leave it with paint. This is up to you and how you want the style of your painting to be when you're finished. So try some pen if you're up for it. And there we have it. I'm going to go ahead and add my signature. I do my initials in the bottom right corner to my piece, and I have a finished bookshelf of books. I hope you had a chance to follow along. If not, be sure to do that and have fun painting your own bookshelf of books. See you next time.